was glad when they said, come let us go to the house of the Lord. I was glad when they say, come let us go to the church with no walls. You are my brother, you are my sister. From all over the world we are united in the house of God, in the church with no walls.
Welcome to the Church with No Walls podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dearbone, and this week I have the pleasure of being joined by someone who I consider to be a sister. She is someone I've known for a while. She is, you talk about being a part of everything, she's a part of everything. If it's a thing, she's a part of it, and that's what makes her a great person to talk to and to interview. She is a minister, she's a mother, she is a singer. She's an activist. She is in service. She is truly a Renaissance woman. So with that, hopefully that's a good enough opening for you. Let's welcome Megan Bailey to the podcast.
Thanks, Ryan. That was better than good.
So well, good. So I want to bring you in right. So Megan is, like I said, she's in a lot of things. She's in a lot of service organizations. She is a minister herself, and she also is an activist, a community activist, and has been so for many years. And so part of the reason I want to bring you on the podcast is because we talk a lot about, obviously we talk about religion. We talk about on this podcast, we talk about outside ministries, unique ministries, but service is a ministry and so is activism.
Yes.
Because if you look at it, the Bible talks about being an activist for him and for the kingdom and being in service for him. So Megan, you
It
are
does.
you are the quintessential, and plus you being a minister, you understand it on a level that somebody like me doesn't. So let's dive in this way. So Megan, what got you into activism, first of all? What was kind of the steps that led you into becoming an activist?
So originally, I'll be honest, the way in which I grew up and the way in which it was quoted to me, and I don't blame my family for this at all. I think a lot of what they were saying and a lot of the advice that they were giving me was a safety precaution. But it was a lot of work, church, home. Go to work, go to church, go home. You can't get in trouble. You can't get caught up in anything. You can't be in the wrong place at the wrong time if you do work, church, home. And I think in general they were just trying to give me a structure, right? What I discovered as an adult, as I begun to see so many other things and move into other areas and move from my home state of Tennessee to Kentucky and had kids of my own, like what I begun to see was that's not necessarily true. And especially as it pertains to being a minority, it's not true. And again, I don't blame them as much as I think that they were just trying to protect me and they were trying to protect my mind. But the other part of that is the truth will have to eventually come out, right? So my initial, I don't even that step into activism was crazy. So George Floyd and his encounter with the police and that outcome is the catalyst for the activism that I do today. I was angry. I was furious, angry, like screaming at the screen, angry. If I had been there, I probably would have tackled that police officer, angry. And I didn't know what to do with it. Um, it's still, I'm thinking about it now, even this many years later, and I'm getting frustrated. I didn't know what to do with it. I was angry, I was frustrated. And there were a number of people in the area that were angry or frustrated as well. And so that put me in a space where I could sit with people who had like mind and like feeling. And they were super influential in We can put together this protest. We can do this thing. We can get this information out into the community. We can do this as a community. And it was the first time I really understood what it was like to be with a group of people who wanted to see change. That doesn't mean we did everything right, but what it did was put me in place in space with people. And it taught me about so many other avenues that there were. That moment taught me about so many other avenues that were present for me to be active. Um, don't just be frustrated, be active. Like, don't just be upset, but actually get involved in changing the world. And that was the actual catalyst. So it's been a few years. I think 2020 was frustrating for everybody, but like that was that was the catalyst that like sent me into doing all of the things I do now.
And so
I, yeah.
with activism, people will say, well, protesting, stuff like that, that's not of God, that's not of the Bible, that's not
Oh
that's
boy.
not that's not religious. So how first of all, how did you make peace with the two together? And then what would you tell to somebody else who says, when you're protesting, when you're being loud, when you're being, people
hmm
who get arrested or do things in
hmm
order to disrupt the system or something like that, that's not
hmm
of God. How do you
hmm
explain it to them?
So I've received this question a few times, and I really want people to understand exactly who Jesus was, right? I get this question quite often, and I'm always wondering, what Jesus did you read about? Because if you really read into the scriptures, if you really take the time to read the Bible, and if you hold it to your heart as you say you do, then you will recognize that that's exactly what his existence was. It was disrupting the system. Very reason why we're in Holy Week, right? Very reason why they killed him.
Mm.
He
Yep.
died, and it was a part of it. It was a part of his assignment, right, on our behalf. But ultimately, at that time, he was disrupting the system. He was asking questions. He was going into the synagogue and saying, no, no, that's actually not how you should behave. And he was mentioning, the things that you do to me, the things you do to others is what you do to me. So if you're feeding and you're clothing other people, you are blessing me. And likewise, if you are disrupting people's lives, or you're doing away with who they are, you are also offending me. You are also coming against me, because ultimately we're his children, right? So what we do to the least of these, we are doing to the Lord. It's important that we recognize that his entire life was about changing lives for the better, right? So if we believe that we can be changed through his grace and his mercy, then those are the same things that he has extended to us to be able to do with his people right here today, right? It is imperative that we recognize that Jesus himself was an activist. An activist shakes up the ground. An activist puts a different spin on what might already be an established structure, right? They come in and they say, why is that like that? And is that beneficial to all people or just to one group of people? Jesus did that, and made himself available to the least of these, to those people who had been thrown away, those people that had been discarded, those people that no one wanted to deal with. He always made it so that people had to check themselves. When he bent down in the sand, and we don't know what he wrote basically, but in my spiritual mind, I like to think that he says, why did you just pull the woman out here and not the man? There was always a sense there was always a sense of correction, right? And his activism, because that's exactly what his life was. His activism should be the model and the blueprint for our activism. And so there's a big conversation about like the separation between church and state, but but that's on a different, that's a different side. That's a structural situation where if we're talking about religion and we're talking about doing the things and extending the grace and being present as Jesus was present, then we would have to get into the activism portion because his entire life was service. How can I serve you? We recognize who he is, but his entire life was, how can I serve you? All the way down to dying for you,
Yeah.
all the way down to it. Arrested, beat for us. Like that's that is it aligns.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
aligns, and too often we separate that and make it as though like we're in our church walls and we can't be bothered with that. No, no. As a matter of fact, Jesus wants you to. There was never a church, right? Like that happened after, but he was teaching on the rocks in front of the water. You know, like he was teaching in the boat. He was cheap. There was never a structure there. So like his work was outside with the people, in the midst of the people, to serve the people. And so that's how I put those two things together. Like that's what I'm supposed to be doing because my Lord and Savior did that.
So now, what about when people say, and there's always a thin line between activism and something else. So when people say, well, when you guys are out marching in the streets, or when you guys are being overly loud, let's say you got a
Mm.
bullhorn and you're standing on the side of the road yelling, not saying that you do these things, but just people
I
who
have.
are, you have, I know you have, but people who are considered to be activists because
Yeah.
they're in some way, maybe they're making people uncomfortable, or
Mm,
they're doing it in a way that's not, it's one thing to ask a question. It's one thing to sit in a meeting and say, "Hey, I have a question. What about this?" Versus, when you see people out in the streets, or people
mm,
being in a more, they're still being peaceful, but they're being in a more protesting type of mode. How
yeah.
does that reconcile, with you as well? Considering that that's what some people are going to go to. People are going to say, well, Jesus didn't march through the streets,
Uh,
with a sign or a bullhorn. How does that factor in as well?
First of all, he always had followers, but that's just like my side note. There was always a crowd, honey. Okay, every time he showed up, there was a crowd. Um, and if I know people, like I think I know people, and people been peopling for a long time, then there was some noise in them crowds,
Mhm.
right? But listen, and I've had this question asked of me as well. I'm always perplexed by those that say that's not the right way. Well, you tell me what the right way is. Because I've lobbied in Frankfurt with the legislatures and sat down at tables and shook hands and wore the suit. And I also protested on the street. And you know what? The right way is to get you to listen. And if it happens to be that the way in which I'm going about protesting is uncomfortable for you, that's actually what I want because we don't make any changes when we're comfortable.
Mm.
We don't decide to do anything different when we're comfortable. That's just human nature. When we're comfortable, we don't try to figure out what we can do or what's going to be adjusted in our lives to make us uncomfortable, right? So I happen to believe that there's not necessarily a right or a wrong way to have your voice heard. I feel like there are appropriate times for appropriate measures. And if it comes to the fact that I've got to stand on the side of the road with a bullhorn, that means I've probably gone through two or three other ways of having contact with those whom I deem need to be contacted. And you're not listening. So now I'm gonna disrupt the land, and we're gonna see what happens at that point. I struggle with that question sometimes because I don't know that there's a right or wrong way to protest. I think there are appropriate avenues to take at appropriate times, and so and I don't feel like ministry hinders any of that.
And you actually had mentioned uh, previous question that the churches have kind of stepped away from the
Oh,
activism of what we've seen. It seems, in
yeah.
history, church has been, in a
Mm-hmm.
way, the storehouse where a lot of activism came from.
Mm-hmm.
So, you look the civil rights movement, the church was the place. That was the place where a lot of the meetings were held, where the organizations came together and said, what are we
Mm-hmm.
going to do? How are we going to tackle this? Even before that, when you had a bunch of other things going on, the church was the central focus and the central place for a lot of the activism that changed the landscape of our world and of our country. Why is it now, in your opinion, as somebody who does this work and has seen this work, why is the church now walking away from that and saying, well, we're going to just kind of sit here and we're going to do what we do. We're going to let the outside world take care of that, and we're not going to
Mm-hmm.
concern ourselves with it. We're not going to preach about it. We're not going to move outside of the walls and then
Mm-hmm.
go do it ourselves. We're going to let the other folks do it.
Oh boy. Especially as it pertains to the Black church. And I could talk about the Black church. I know somebody is going to listen to this podcast and they're going to say, why is she singling out the Black church? I'm going to single out the Black church because I'm a part of the Black church. And I've been a part of the Black church since I was a child. I'm a church baby, grew up on the pew. And so I'm going to talk about it because I know about it. I think there's a number of different things involved in it. I think there's resource, a lack of resource, lack of knowledge, right? So we see the things, but we don't always understand the things that are happening. And we fail to understand in some cases how that's going to be a negative effect on the people in our congregation, in the communities that we serve, right? There's a lack of resource. A lot of times we don't have the monetary resources that some other areas might have. I think that when we got what we believe to be beyond the civil rights movement, and we didn't have those leaders that were involved in that type of work, then it just went by the wayside. And I don't think it's that our leadership can't be involved in that work. We have a number of leaders in the Bowling Green area that attempt to be a part. But I think that that is having to sit down and not only read the Bible but also read the bill, and and how do you merge those two, right? Like how do you have conversation about the parable but also have conversation about the policy? And unfortunately, I think too many of us don't know how to do that, and so then there's no merger. And without that merger, um, then the product doesn't happen, right? Like without coming to a particular conclusion, then we cannot construct any type of argument or fight to ensure that we're not only learning about Jesus, but we're also learning about the world that we live in. See, we have to live here, right? And yes, we're all living to live again. I believe in the Lord, and I believe that when I leave here, I'm going to go live with Him. But in the midst, I'm gotta live here. I've got to live here too.
Yep.
Like, I feel like the churches don't do enough, and I tend to get a little furious about it. I feel like there's a sense of being scared. I I I believe that sometimes the business aspect of the church and some of the tax categories keep churches from being from being a part. I think that there is a notion that you have to follow a particular individual or a particular party, when in actuality, we just need to be talking about the issues. And the issues don't have a D or a R or a I or anything else behind them. Those are just the issues that are impacting your congregation and they're impacting your community. And so I think that there's a disconnect between knowledge, resource, and in some cases ability. Um, it's a few things. It's a web. It really is. It's a web. I don't think one thing or the other would change that narrative. I think that there's got to be honest conversation in clergy, in the world of clergy, between ministers, pastors, leadership, however you want to call it, whatever whatever your leader might be titled, there's got to be a conversation about um, about continuing to be what continuing to be the hub of change. And that's what I believe the pastors in the civil rights movement understood. And again, I think because they were living through some harsher times, or what were deemed to be harsher times, they had a better understanding. We've gotten laxed. We've got comfortable. And that's why we see the things we're seeing today, because we don't keep our foot on the gas. We back up and say, okay, well, we all go to school now. It's okay. We can all work in the same places now. It's all right. Like, there are other issues. There are other issues we should probably tackle as well. And continue to be those change agents that God wants us to be.
And so now you mentioned about the parable and the bill, being able to have a frank and honest conversation
Mm-hmm.
about those. And it seems that, and obviously we're speaking in general because I don't know every pastor, I don't know every person.
Right, right, right.
They don't necessarily, not that they're not educated, but maybe there's a lack of wanting to be educated on it, or there's a lack of there's feeling now. I don't want to be up here in the pulpit talking about something that I don't necessarily know about, or that I could be, especially with us live streaming church now, things are on social media.
Yeah.
I don't want somebody to come in me and you said this about this bill or this whatever, and I don't believe
Mm-hmm.
that fits with the Bible, or you're wrong in how this is put together. How do we create that conversation, that dialogue where there's an
Yeah.
education on how the bill and the parable, the stories work together, so that way there is maybe that part of the process, or that part of the stigma is gone.
Yeah. So the thing about social media is you're always gonna have some keyboard warriors, and you're always gonna have some people that agree with you, right? Like, it doesn't matter what you put up. If I put up a picture of a orange, somebody's gonna have something to say. If I put up a picture of a baby, somebody's gonna have something to say. Somebody's gonna say the baby is beautiful, and somebody is gonna say the baby is too big. Like, that's it just happens to be. Social media is that world, right? Like, it opens it up to so many different aspects and so many different opinions that you're just gonna have to rock with that, right? The other part of that is resourcing your congregation. So I believe that God puts in every congregation exactly what that congregation needs, right? So maybe maybe the policies and the bills are not really your thing, right? But there's somebody there that's been paying attention. Somebody there that's been watching KET. Somebody there that's um been watching the Senate floor. There's somebody there that is invested. I promise you there is. And if you are not, I got to figure out how I'm going to say this and not, cuz honey, I don't want to. People get in position and they get a couple of little titles and then they get offended.
Hmm.
Okay? But if you're not too big about yourself, then it is appropriate to resource those people in your congregation. It doesn't mean that you know everything, and you know what? You can preface those conversations with, by my understanding of said policy, right? Like, that's fair, because policies and bills, they have additives in all the time. There's things that change all the time. By the time we see something, that thing is probably changed 10 times. It done went through 2 or 3 different spaces, and it done hit 15 folks' hands by the time we see something. So it's fair to say that in this particular moment, it's fair to put those guardrails there. It's also fair. It's also fair for churches to bring folks in. And maybe you're not doing this on Sunday morning. You know what I'm saying? Like, maybe that's not what you're doing. But maybe you're tag teaming. Churches love the tag team. Maybe you're tag teaming, and maybe you're doing a workshop. Jesus and justice. I don't know. Parable and policy. Like, maybe you're tag teaming and you're doing some sort of workshop. That way you can merge those ideas, because again, we have to live here. So I can pretend like the things are not happening around me, and I can pretend Mm, I'm gonna get up on the soapbox and I'm gonna come down. But
That's fine.
one of the things I can't take is Jesus knows all about it. I believe in God. Yes, I can believe in God and also care about my fellow man. Those two things can live in the same space. You know what I'm saying? And then so it's fair for us to it's fair for us to bring those ideas together and to outsource a little bit. That's community building. That no one person knows everything. So maybe it is doing some regular studying. Maybe it is resourcing the people in your congregation. Maybe it's even tapping outside of the four walls and resourcing some agency who does this work. And then consulting with God, because you should always be doing that, because you shouldn't be getting up there teaching a Bible study, a Sunday school, or doing a Sunday morning sermon without talking to the Lord.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
after you get all the information, consult with the master, and then you have a whole plate to give to the sheep.
That makes sense. So now, how you as a mother, you got two young black men. How do
Mm-hmm.
you how do you teach them using both parable and policy to understand what's coming for them, what they need to do? Because they may be activists, they may not be, but at least getting them in that mindset of understanding, okay, this is how the two work together. How do you train them up? And obviously, they're two young men. There's a bunch of
Yeah.
young people that are coming up in generations that we see, where we work at a college and younger.
Mm-hmm.
How do you express that to them? Because the older people are the older people. The people our age
Yeah,
and older, they're going to think the way they think. But you've got
they are.
younger, moldable minds who may be able to understand this better. How do you
Mm-hmm.
tell them the same thing?
I think that this generation of churchgoers, and a lot of people love to come down on young people and they love to fuss about how young people are stepping away from the church. But what I think they're stepping into is community. And they're doing what the Lord did. They're getting outside of themselves, outside of custom, outside of tradition, outside of the church clothes, outside of the church walls, and they are building community amongst themselves. I've had so many young people that I know that I've learned are holding their own Bible studies. They're not leaving Jesus; they're leaving the church and the structure of the church that will not allow them to work. Um, the way in which I express it to my children, because I do have two young black boys. I worry about them, and also they have to learn how to navigate this world without mama standing right there. Um, I take them into a lot of places with me. So they serve as junior deacons at our church, and that allows them to work in the church. But also they do a substantial amount of protesting and activism work with me. So both children have marched. One child has lobbied the Kentucky legislature. It is important to me for them to go into those spaces and to understand that this is God work. Mama doesn't just preach on Sunday or play gospel music in the car. Um, this is also God work, making sustainable change so that people's lives are better is God work. And we're carrying God as we do this work. So they understand, I think, pretty well how it needs to operate, and they ask questions a lot, especially the youngest one. He asked a lot of questions about behaviors, about human behaviors, about why they're they're people just like I'm a person. Why would anyone treat them differently, or why would anyone deliberately harm them? He asks questions like that, and then he'll follow it up with, that's not what Jesus wants us to do. That's not what God said. Like, so I think they are putting the dots, like they're connecting the dots fine. And I think a lot of our young people would, if people would allow for them to experience. allow for them to experience, allow for them to sit down and talk. They have a lot of great ideas and they come up with a lot of wonderful actions that are reflective uh, of change, but also reflective of standard. And because it doesn't look like it used to, we shove them off or ignore them, and that shouldn't be happening. As they are the ones, we need that energy. I argue that we need the wisdom of the seasoned saints, because I love me a good seasoned saint. Okay, they know a whole lot that I've never had to experience, never had to endure. They have endured a lot of things that I'll never have to touch because they endured it, right? And then we need the energy of the young people, because I'm not gonna be marching forever. So I need you,
Yeah.
I need you to get out here and do the leg work, right? So I think it's fair for people to give that space and that opportunity to young people as they become who they are, and change this world, because they will change this world. They
And,
really will.
and so kind of based off of that, we a lot of times we will credit Martin Luther King because he was a
Mm,
preacher as well as an activist. Jesse Jackson, preacher as well as an activist. So we will look to them as the gold standard of what it looks like to be a man of the cloth or a person of the cloth as well as an
mm.
activist. Is that fair in this day and age to still hold clergy to that standard, because though those men did it in such a way that it kind of left it almost is like, I akin it to like basketball, to Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan played at
Mm.
such a high level that everybody's still comparing. It's the GOAT conversation. Even he said there is no GOAT because it's hard to do that. That's not a fair comparison. Do you feel like, looking at, some of the we have like people like Raphael Warnock, we have people who are
Mm.
clergy that are also activists and leaders, but is it unfair to clergy, even you being clergy yourself, for people to look at you and expect you to do what they did because of the way they did it and the people they had following them and the changes they made? Is that kind of an unfair conversation to have, or justification to make?
Oh, Ryan. Okay. So my husband and I have this conversation. So there'll never be another Martin. Um, they'll not be it. We've got to think about time and access to content, access um to visuals. There'll just never be another Martin. Um, I think that everyone tries to have an example of the thing, right? So if in my lifetime we are um able to elect another minority president, they're always going to compare them to Obama, right? Like, I just think our human nature wants to connect the dots that way, and I think we always want a basis, like a basis to build off of. I don't know that I personally see it as unfair, particularly when people make that comparison. And I usually think my own personal feeling is, ooh, ooh. Martin is huge shoes to fill. You think Jesse? Oh Lord. Okay. Those are, I don't the Fannie Lou Hamers and the oh, I know we're speaking specifically about clergy in regards to Martin and Jesse, but
Yeah, but still,
um
the greats, the leaders, the ones who
yeah,
took
yeah.
it a different level.
I, if anybody ever makes those comparisons of me, I'm just always grateful that anybody sees me in any way, shape, or form in that light. But I do think that some people might be intimidated by that. Like, they might feel like, well, I'm not Dr. King. And you know what? You're not. And it was a different time. And it did seem to be that people were more receptive of leadership in that form, right? Everybody got behind Dr. King. Dr. King had a team, that team of individuals. He was really the face. They were the ideas. Um, and everybody came together and they did that thing. But just because you're not moving an entire state doesn't mean that you can't move a street. And I think those are the things that hinder people from doing the work. I think they think, or I think majority of individuals think, well, I'm not being impactful enough to make a sustainable change. And that's clergy as well, right? Like I don't think that all clergy understand that you can be influential in your own congregation, and that things that you're teaching and the things that you're giving them and the resources that you're giving them and all of those things then go out into the world, right? If I'm preaching to 100 people on Sunday morning, those 100 people are going out into the world, and whatever they picked up from me is what they're giving out. So you are being influential. It just doesn't look the same. Do I think that it's fair for people to judge in that way? I honestly am slightly stumped, but I will say that I think that a lot of times people are just trying to make a foundation. Like they're
Yeah.
just trying to have something compared to, because societally that's what we've been taught, is that like we have to compare and contrast. I think that we use people like Dr. King as a foundation,
Yeah.
as a blueprint, I would say. And then if somebody doesn't reach that, then sometimes we're judgmental of it. But that's where it's important for the activists and for the activist clergy activists, however you want to put that. That's why it's important for them to know exactly why they're doing that work, and exactly who they serve. Because if you understand who you are and who you are in Him, then you'll do the work whether you get a pat on the back or whether you become a big name or not. You'll just do the work because it's good to do.
And then, kind of based off of that, some people will talk about if a clergy is out there doing that work, doing the activist work, they may they may throw them under the bus, trying to say they're secularizing it. They're trying to be of the world and not so much of the church because they're trying to make a name off the activism. They're trying to be, they're going on around the country on a tour bus, doing activist work, and they're when they're not in their church on Sunday because they're out doing this other stuff. How does that, where do you see that fitting in or sitting in there?
My goodness. So my thing is as long as people are getting the benefit, they generally keep their mouth shut. Um, and that's just the truth. As it pertains to ministry in the way in which I see it. Quite honestly, in a lot of different spaces, folks don't even want to recognize females as ministers. That's a whole other podcast, with a whole other instance, because there is scripture that debunks that foolishness. But um, there's
I'll bring you
scripture
back
that
for that
debunks.
one.
Yeah, there's scripture that actually debunks that ideology. If you're willing to read it. Um, but the truth of the matter is that if in fact you get a name from doing this type of work, then that's just what comes with the territory. Uh, if people begin to follow you, I would say somebody like a Jamal Bryant, love him or hate him, he's influential, right? And so I don't think he's out here deliberately. I don't think, like, now I could be totally wrong. I'm not with that man all the time. Uh, but but I don't think that he's out here deliberately like, oh, this is gonna get me attention. Like, generally the heart of an activist doesn't even want to be recognized. They just want the thing to change. And if it so happens to be somebody who's in a clergy position, and they're doing this work, and they do happen to make a name for themselves, then that's just God in them. God has lifted them up. Um, Because the truth of the matter is like, what's the difference between the question that you just asked and people who want their name in lights, and so that's why they deem themselves a pastor? Like, I just, it's weird when people get to acting like that, because part of the reason why we follow particular people is because of their name. Is it
Yeah.
not?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was, I was
Yeah.
just checking. And you ain't following nobody. You heard their name. You
Right.
heard Joshua Giles. You heard Jamal Bryant. You heard TD Jakes.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you think about these people, you're following them because of their name.
Mm-hmm.
You went to their church when you visited their city because of their name. So what's the problem with them doing the change work out in the community? Because that's actually what we're supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm. And they're going to be somebody who potentially gets somebody who would not come and do the work otherwise, but because they know the name, because they believe in the person, or they
Of
believe in the
course.
work, now they're going to be more engaged and more likely to do the work because of the name, which you could use as a negative or a positive.
Of course.
We will continue our conversation with Megan Bailey on our next episode. For the Church with No Walls podcast, I'm your host, Ryan Dearbone. As always, take care and be blessed.
Come let us go to the church with no walls. You are my brother, you are my sister. From all over the world we are united in the house of God, in the church with no walls. La 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 la, without walls.